Jay Bloom, thank you for joining us on ThinkTech. Great to have you here.
Thank you. DJ.
It's nice to meet somebody who is dedicated to social services, and you are a psychologist who has joined Cullen Hayashida at the Kupuna Education Center at Kapiolani Community College, and I think it's a great place to spend your time, so good
you.
for you.
Thank you.
So tell us what you're doing there, Jay.
Well, we're presently looking at expanding the traditional areas that the college has been focusing on in gerontology, where they've been looking at caregiving issues, helping older adults as they age from the frails kind of point of view, to look at aging from a positive point. And so we're looking to engage employers, how they can work more effectively in recruiting and retaining older adults, as well as how to work with a more multi-generational workforce.
You know, in Yiddish, that's a mitzvah, right? I don't know if you speak the language, but to me, a mitzvah is the nicest thing you can do. It means giving to others and making the lives of others better lives. So good for you for doing that. So, it seems to me, just as a matter of background, that Hawaii used to have, socially and ethnically, culturally, a whole system of taking care of elders, which has dissipated over the past, since statehood. It's kind of gone away as kids leave and the old generations die off, and now it's not clear that that 2 generations or 3 generations would live with each other and take care of the older people. There are spots of that, of course, and everyone knows someone who's doing it, but I don't think it's a demographic anymore. So we have an emerging, growing problem, which renders the heart. What do they do, as they get older and nobody is around to take care of them, and they don't have the money for care and for facilities they may need, especially in the age of the nuclear family where nobody is there to take care of them. And I guess that's the problem you guys are addressing, but it's a real serious problem.
Well, we're actually trying to get ahead of that curve and anticipating that it's coming down the pike, particularly with the aging of the boomer generation. Almost a third of all people who live in Hawaii are age 50 or above. And
is this an average that's common in the country?
We're actually ahead of it. We're above that average.
We have more older people
Absolutely.
than other places.
Because Hawaii actually leads all states in longevity. We have the highest average life expectancy of any of the 50 states. And so we have an opportunity here to actually try to engage our older adults at an earlier point, because they have a lot to give back and want to be involved. I have a saying that unless you're engaged in your later years, you're just dying longer, not living longer.
Sure, isn't it true? I mean, take all of those dementia-type diseases, Alzheimer's and all that. I mean, I think the general understanding, the common knowledge, I don't know if it's true medically, but the common knowledge is that if you are active and you are thinking and using your mind, you won't lose it so quick. Is it true?
Absolutely. We're learning more about that. And the more that you have a purpose and a meaning for living longer, the more that, you have to have a reason to get up in the morning.
Yeah.
And I think particularly the boomer generation, represent probably the most educated, healthiest, in many cases most affluent older population that we've ever had. And Hawaii has an opportunity actually to get back to be a leader, but not only nationally, but potentially internationally on this issue. Because the 2 major countries in globally that are most concerned about aging are actually China and Japan. And
why is that? The way the bell curve works?
Because way their bell curve works and their own aging of their population. They're looking for models on how to more effectively deal with their aging population. And I think that represents an opportunity for Hawaii.
So we could be a leader. We can invent something here. Yeah. Export a little intellectual property.
Another opportunity that I think would be close to your heart is that companies like Intel are investing major dollars into how technology can help people age more effectively in their homes. And I think Hawaii could be an excellent beta site because of our nature of being in a set of islands and mostly rural, and our own interest in kind of expanding our investment in technology. So I just visited with somebody up at the medical school just before I came here, and they had a real interest in looking at that as well.
Sure, and I think there's money to be made in that, because that's something you can definitely, it's a product, right? It can be, you can touch it, feel it, make it work, and therefore you can sell it, and you can sell it anywhere and everywhere, because this is a problem, an issue that exists everywhere in the world, you know, including China and Japan. So, but my question to you though, and this is really the meat of it, I think, is so you want to make these old folks, you want to make them productive and have them engaged and get up in the morning with a mission and all that. How do you do that in a convincing way? Because if you do it in an ersatz way,
Yeah.
you know, it's not going to work. I'm not going to feel that feeling. So what do you do for me when I get up in the morning? What do I do with your program?
Well, you need to think about that there are more to planning your later years than typically just looking at finances or looking at, you know, your health benefit. Most employers tend to focus on, you know, here's what we can do for a benefit program financially, and here's how it fits with Social Security, whatever. But there's very little attention to pay. What do you do with these next 20 or 30 years? You know, the old model used to be you got educated or whatever, you worked, and then you retired, and you felt lucky if you had any years to live before you died. Now, if a man reaches age 55 in good health, odds are he's got 20 or 30 more years of healthy living in front of him.
Knock wood.
Knock wood. And to give you a sense of how big a period of time that is, let's say, you know, you think of age 20 to age 50, and that was a lot of living in there. And the truth of it is, most people plan more for their vacations than they do what they do with their later life. Mm-hmm. And so I think what we're talking about at the college is thinking much more of a portfolio approach, where you think about what kind of work we might want to do, either paid or unpaid. How do you want to be involved, you know, in the community? What hobbies? Think of much more of a diversified set of involvements. And how do you plan that?
So you know, you're talking at the level of counseling with this individual person.
In a sense, coaching. I wouldn't say counseling. Counseling is an element of a clinical nature.
Okay.
But you know, there's good news and bad news about this, Jay. This period of life. The good news is most people come to it with good health, and they have the potential of a number of years in front of them. The other good news is that most employers, including here in Hawaii, are going to need them because we're going to have, believe it or not, an estimated workforce shortage coming down the pike. So employers are going to be much more aggressive in how do they recruit and retain older workers in a variety of ways. The third
We say retain, but what about just hire them cold?
Absolutely.
So I'm out of I practice law, so I'm for some reason I stopped practicing law, and I wake up in the morning and I counsel with you, and you're going to actually affirmatively connect me, are you?
Potentially. I'll get to the bad. I'll give you to the bad news. So the other good news is that if you want to be involved in community service, there are any number of nonprofits that could use your time and energy in a variety of ways. The bad news is for each person it has to be customized. There's no template for it. So for example,
You can tell that's what I'm looking for.
so if you were talking about financially, there'd be a variety of ways I could give you a template. But in terms of your own life planning, that has to be customized. And so what works for you may not work for somebody else. So that's the bad news. The other challenge is oftentimes it's a couple opportunity for discussion, either to get closer or farther apart. So one spouse wants to travel more, one doesn't. One wants
It's a
to
new
start
life for them. They have to reorganize their whole relationship.
So it becomes another one. Yeah, I've actually had women, engage me saying, "Find something for my husband, please." I married him for life, but not for lunch.
It sounds like a line out of Henny Youngman.
Yeah, that's right.
Take my wife, please.
Yeah, right. But it's a big period of time. Probably what I hear, because I've done some executive coaching for about 20 years. Probably what I've heard more than anything else is the three things people want to do with their time is they want to travel, they want to spend more time with their kids and grandkids, and three, they want to do some recreation. What they find inevitably with their travels, they have to come back home sooner or later.
It ends.
Two, their kids and grandkids have their own lives. They
Right.
only want so
True.
much of you.
Absolutely.
And three, recreating only works if it's a part of an overall life plan rather than just the only
It
thing
can't be
you
the
do.
whole thing.
And so many times people end up having what I refer to as unplanned sabbaticals. They'll take that year or two off, think that's going to be their lifestyle, and then figure out, okay, now what? I've wound down, and how now can I get engaged?
Big question for you, Jay. That sabbatical, it's it's a trial period. You sort of jump in and you find maybe it works in some ways, it doesn't. So it's a learning experience.
Right.
But is it really necessary for the average Joe to have that sabbatical, or can he be smarter and organize this thing to avoid the need for the trial and error?
Yeah, absolutely. My encouragement is people begin to think about their later years earlier rather than later. Just like you hear the advice around financial planning and taking care of yourself physically, whatever, you want to begin to think about, okay, what am I going to do to be engaged in those later years? And like, again, a portfolio where you do a diversified investment, I encourage people to think about a diversified area so it doesn't become one thing. And like a portfolio financially, it has to be rebalanced from time to time. So you might start off and say, this is going to be what I'm doing the next 3 to 5 years, but then I want to do something else later on. It's a big block of time for most folks, and
It's your whole life,
and
That's big.
we have very few models for it. And as I said earlier, unfortunately, what works for one person doesn't work for another. So there was a headline in the Advertiser, I think around the first of the year, about 200 state workers retiring. And some of the essence of the article is, wasn't it a good thing that we're going to save this money, whatever. I had two thoughts when I read that article. The first was, what happens to the knowledge of those 200 people that are leaving? How effectively did the state capture that knowledge? Because as most employers find out, there's a lot of experience that walks out the door. And unless they're aggressive in capturing that, the organization suffers.
Yeah, it really sounds like it's not a very good way. You separate them from their identity, from what makes them tick and want to live, want to, be active, and then at the same time you lose their knowledge. So this is a terrible result.
And the second thing I thought of is, what are those 200 folks going to do that want to age in place here, that have a whole lot of experience and still a lot of gas in the tank, and to what degree are there mechanisms for setting up to respond to them?
Yeah.
So hopefully the college is going to try to respond to that particular area.
But so far you're talking theoretical. I'd like to know the detail of what you're actually doing.
Well, the college has started a course where they are doing what they're calling kind of encore careers, a concept where it's a 6-week course, non-credited, that is taught by one of the adjunct faculty there. They really try to help people kind of go through that.
People
process.
go into the course.
They go
so
into the
if
course.
I have questions and issues about
Right.
this, I go into the course and I get hardcore
Questions
advice.
more on, here are the questions you need to explore, and here's how you want to think about it. Here are resources you might want to take advantage of that are out there to help you with this.
Should I take my
exploration.
wife with me?
There are folks who have done that in terms of couples. We've started the dialogue with some of the local unions that are providing services to their retirees or their pre-retirees about putting on some workshops as well for them. Because again, regardless of kind of the economic or social class, people either going to have to work in their later years, or a large percentage of them are going to want to work. And we think of work not just in terms of pay, but also in terms of giving back or returning to the community.
There's another part of it. I mean, you say work, it sounds like you're talking about a job. And the job could be for money, or it could be for community service, which is, equally engaging. But what about the new chapter kind of thing? I mean, I knew a fellow once who decided he didn't want to practice law anymore. He was well younger than 50. Mm-hmm. And he decided he wanted to be a chef because he liked cooking. Right. So he upped and he became a chef. Mm-hmm. And, a chef is an entrepreneurial activity. It's not right. just, I suppose that another category that appeals to me on this is if you have that sort of pent-up, coiled spring wish to have another active business chapter right. where you are in charge of your destiny, not working for anybody else, right. but you're actually, going out and doing the dream you've always had. That's probably the most rewarding thing of all, isn't it?
Right. In fact, the Pacific Business News, not to plug them too badly, but 2 weeks ago they had a feature article about an individual who had retired after 25 years in government service and started his own business at age 63. And I think it's called Made in Hawaii, and it's a very successful business. And he and his wife are both working involved with it. And they like it because they can somewhat control the hours and the pace and the growth of it, and have deliberately, I think one of the punchlines of the article was they deliberately decide not to go large scale because they didn't want to have it take over their
It's
lives.
true. I mean, it has to be on a modest level. Your physical strength isn't what it was.
Well, again, as I said, I think there are a variety of different paths. Some people will re-career and go back and become teachers. It used to be very
Something you always wanted to do.
right. Some will touch into
Psychologists.
that art side of themselves. They've used that left brain their whole life and suddenly say, I always wanted to paint or I wanted to write.
So you actually unleash them. I mean, you show them this opportunity in the class and say, it's okay, Jay, you can do this. It's all right.
It's not unusual for us to kind of go through that, those age 20 to 50 kind of an automatic pilot. You're working hard, you're doing your career, you're raising your family, whatnot. And I often think of it almost like a second adolescence. When a kid goes off to college, they have two major questions they have to struggle with. The first question is who am I now that I'm not a part of my primary family? What's my identity? And the second question is, what am I going to do in life? And those are the same questions that people kind of pop out in their 50s and 60s after they've raised their families or maybe experienced a major loss or divorce.
Looking for a better answer.
Who am I?
Who am I
now?
really? Who am I really? What do I really want to do in this life?
You remind me of Lily Tomlin, who had a funny quote. She said, I always knew I wanted to be somebody when I grew up. I just didn't know I needed to be so specific.
Exactly. But, think about it. I mean, again, coming back to the mitzvah part, a lot of us, go through life and the vectors are upon us for one thing or another. Our parents, our situation, who knows what. We get stuck in something, and I think this happens in Hawaii. And we're in that channel, and we can't get out very easily for one reason or another. We go through a whole productive working life, and we never smell the roses. Right. We bury, the possibility of something else. And then one day we're retired. And that's also not something we had any control over, but it came to the end of the road on that job, that employment, whatever. And here now we meet you. And you tell us it's okay to dream, to realize your dream. It's okay to have the life you never thought of before. This is giving a huge gift.
Well, I've always thought, rather interesting, Jay, that it takes oftentimes a terminal illness that you'll hear somebody say, or some other major life event that somebody said, I suddenly got clear on what's important to me. And, as I said, people often go through that automatic pilot stage. And I've seen, whether it's suddenly they get laid off in a major way, or they've had a spouse with a major illness, or they had a close friend that suffers something shakes them, and they come out of that slumber and suddenly say, what do I really want to do the rest of my life? What kind of legacy do I want to leave? If I only got a few more years to do, what do I want to do? And it can be very cleansing and very clarifying.
Yeah, but not everybody gets it. It is a gift. I mean, if you looked around, I'm sure you have, statistically, how many people have this revelation, this epiphany? How many people have this opportunity? Not many people. I think most people go through kind of on automatic pilot their whole lives.
Well, interesting enough, there was not too long ago there was a study that people with less means are actually more philanthropic than people with means. And
that's why the people with means got the means.
Well, they also discover oftentimes in later life that giving has its own reward. And that's why you'll see people who could be a retired fireman, retired teacher, retired nurse, whatever, they continue to give back and find ways to engage in people. Say to them, why don't you just go off and play or whatever? And they said, hey, I still get a lot from this. And, I think here in Hawaii, we're blessed with that special spirit that can be leveraged.
Yeah.
And frankly, I think, again, Hawaii could be potentially a national model, if not an international
So
model.
how do we get there? So far you talked about counseling, which is a one-on-one.
Well, I would like
then
to
you talked
see,
about a classroom. So is there structure? Is
yeah,
there organizational?
I think there are opportunities for each part of our sectors. So, for example, I would encourage the business sector to be much more proactive in thinking about how to strategically leverage older adults in their workplace.
Give us an example.
An example would be to to look at their workplace policies and say, okay, how can we more effectively do multi-generational training? It's probably one of the hottest areas of diversity training now, because it's one of the first times we've had 4 generations basically in a workplace. And I don't know about you, but it's kind of funny if I was working for somebody my son's age, or vice versa if my son was managing somebody his father's age, or uncle or auntie, and they have different styles. They may be very proficient in technology and doing the tweeting and doing the texting and whatnot, and the older adult has a lot more experience in terms of how do you manage some of the people aspects of this. So I think each generation has something to offer, and each generation needs each other.
But the older generation that comes to work in say Bishop Street, in an office on Bishop Street, are they going to be doing what they did in their careers or completely new?
I would argue that probably more than anything else, the number one thing older adults want, which ironically is increasingly what the younger generation are demanding, is flexibility. So that you're seeing...
Everybody wants that now.
Exactly. I mean, when our generation, I kind of include you in that, our generation going through it, we wanted it, but we didn't demand it. In fact, there was family leave on the books, and there are very few men that took advantage of it. Well, there isn't a major employer around that won't tell you young men now don't have any problem at all taking family leave.
That's true.
And so flexibility is probably the number one thing. It's it wouldn't surprise me that somebody would say, "Hey, I'm willing to work for less money to have more flexibility," or "I would like to do something different that would help me continually learn and be involved."
So, in your role as a psychologist, put yourself now in a law office like mine, and we want to give somebody a break. We want to participate in this kind of program. You have successfully encouraged us. So we have an older person come into the office. What do we have to do to make that person productive? And what do we have to do to have that person respond appropriately to people half his or her age in a work environment that requires productivity on a moment-by-moment basis?
Well, I think, again, rather than necessarily think of it as just a conversation with an older adult, there's a international company called Deloitte that has basically developed what they call 2 rules for every one of their employees. The first rule is that they have a customized work arrangement with each one of their employees as to how they want to work, how many hours, how much at home, telecommute, etc. But the one rule is it has to work for both the employee and for the organization.
Fair enough, yeah.
Okay? The second rule is that every work arrangement is temporary and must minimally be reviewed every 6 months. So it could be reviewed immediately if it doesn't work for one of the others, but minimally every 6 months you're having that conversation. So whether it's the older adult or whether it's the 20-something that comes in and say, okay, here's the expectations in the work agreement, here's the customized work arrangement, that explores how fast you want to be promoted, what are the requirements that we have and expectations for job performance. So it becomes more of a customized conversation. More importantly, it also helps with current older employees, because how does the employer have the conversation with you and says to you, Jay, what are your retirement plans? If I ask you that question, someone in a vacuum, oftentimes your response is, geez, he wants to get rid of me, when actually my fear may be you're going to walk out the door and only give me 30 or 60 days notice.
But it has an emotional charge to it, for sure.
Exactly. But if I'm having that kind of customized conversation with all my employees, it's no different,
Let me ask you a tough question.
Sure.
So I have this elderly person working in my office, whatever kind of office, whatever kind of company. This person, it may be infirm at any moment for physical, health, aging reasons. There are all these laws built around that, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and of course, the notion of discrimination against age. And if you get sick while you're working for me, and I don't, and I fire you because of it, because you're no longer productive, I can get sued for that.
Absolutely.
So I'm accepting a huge risk in hiring you because this could happen. And if you sign a paper, if I say, sign a paper, Jay, that you won't do this to me, that paper is unenforceable. Right. So how do I get by this huge barrier? You may not have an answer, I understand.
Well, one of the answers is that I think you could win a lot of bets at cocktail parties or at bars, is to ask the average person, what age does that law kick in? All right? And most people would guess maybe in their 50s, maybe in their 60s, whatever. The actual federal law kicks in at age 40. That's the age discrimination law.
Yeah.
And so when you start thinking about age 40, well, it pretty much covers a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it's not as unusual as you think.
Yeah.
And so it ends up, protecting pretty much most of your workforce, not just whatever that
It's
perception of the
true,
older.
yeah. Most of your senior, and I shouldn't say senior, but most of your mature workforce.
Yeah, you're thinking of that. But actually, any HR director will tell you that that law kicks in at age 40.
Yeah.
And most people would not think of older people as being age 40.
Yeah. It's just that the risk is greater, don't you think, when you get into a post-retirement age?
I think again, not speaking for my HR colleagues, but I think they would argue that probably any age group has its share of risks.
Okay.
I hear about the 20-year-olds and their reliability concerns and their tattoos and their nose rings and the fact that they may not be as attentive or be able to multitask or whatever, or they're always doing the texting and whatnot. So I think each age group has its particular challenge, and I think that the major message I would give your audience is that don't stereotype any particular age.
Okay.
That again, if you've met one person at age 60, you've met one person. Because I have met 60-year-olds who are just starting families. I've met 60-year-olds who are grandparents. I've met 60-year-olds who are running marathons, and I've met 60-year-olds who are fighting a chronic illness. So the range of variety, particularly when you start factoring in this is the baby boom generation that represents 78 million of them nationally, they're going to be very hard to stereotype.
So tell us what we need to do to make this kind of program come alive. It sounds like you're just starting it. It's a relatively small program in terms of commitment and people right now, but how do we take it to the next step, and how do we export it to Asia or wherever?
I think that the number one thing is to first of all realize that, again, the quote I like is either we are pushed by pain until we're pulled by vision, and we are in a state that is definitely aging quickly. We have a lot of aging in place. We have a hard time retaining our 30 to 45-year-olds given the cost of living, the cost of private schools, etc. So we're losing a lot of them. So we're aging quickly here. And so the opportunity is, can we take that potential challenge and turn it into a strength? And Hawaii could be a center of excellence on that, whether it's at the University of Hawaii, whether it's the medical school, whether it's the tourism industry. I was talking with the head of Disney locally just last week saying, I have a 13-year-old granddaughter. When I was on the mainland, she didn't want to go to Disney World, but she was more than willing to come to Hawaii. In fact, was here this summer at a volleyball camp and spent 2 weeks. And I was delighted, my wife and I, to have our granddaughter with us. At the same time, my daughter was glad to have her daughter exported and have the break. So, grandparent travel and grandparent whatever is a great opportunity for the tourist industry to take advantage of, because increasingly they have the
Hawaii could
wherewithal
do
and the
that.
other.
Yeah,
All right?
Hawaii
And
could
Hawaii
do that.
could be, it'd
We
be the
just have to
reason
get
why
the word out that we are open for that.
not only open, but it's a distinctive competency.
Right.
It's the reason why you would come here versus Acapulco.
Acapulco.
Thank you.
So the question, we're about out of time, and the question is, where can people find out more about your program and this initiative and the possibilities?
Yeah, at the Kapi'olani Community College, there's the program's called the Kupuna Education Center, and there's the phone number. You've got it there, and please feel free to give a call or even go on their website. You can find more information.
Okay, it's kapunaeducation.com. And that's www.kcc.hawaii.edu. Thank you, Jay Bloom. Wish we had more time. We'll do it again. Regards to Colin Hayashida.
Will do. Thank you, Jay.
Thanks, Jay. Aloha.
Aloha.